The Austrian Grand Prix threw up some surprisingly significant stories for almost every team, and for those it went wrong for, it went very wrong. Here's everything we learned from the Red Bull ring. Yuki Tsunoda has rarely looked as strained as he did after the Austrian Grand Prix. He admitted he was at fault for a clumsy clash with Franco Colapinto, was baffled that he was so slow, and came across completely lost after his worst race for Red Bull yet. Qualifying 18th looked worse than it was considering he was a relatively decent 0.26 seconds away from Max Verstappen in Q1, but the miserably uncompetitive race that followed was alarming. Tsunoda finished a twice-lapped 16th, and while that was exaggerated by the time lost in the Colapinto incident and the subsequent pit stop for a new front wing, he was also suffering from terrible degradation. He said the tyres felt like they were melting and described the gap between his pace and the level he needs to be at as massive. Tsunoda has gone 4 races without finishing in the points, and he looks nowhere near changing that situation when things go as badly as they did here, which means that when Verstappen gets eliminated, like he did on lap 1 in Austria thanks to Kimi Antonelli's loss of control at the top of the hill, Red Bull's hopes turn completely to dust. Hence its first pointless F1 weekend since the 2022 season opener. Searing temperatures on Sunday were never going to be good news for a heat-sensitive Mercedes, but that alone doesn't explain why George Russell finished over a minute adrift of McLaren. He became Mercedes' sole hope when Antonelli made the biggest mistake of his rookie season so far by locking his rear brakes into turn 3 and spearing into a helpless Verstappen on the opening lap. Russell ran a quiet race to 5th place that was even worse than he had imagined before the start. The high temperatures were partly to blame, with Mercedes' perennial tyre overheating problem resurfacing. Russell says the team has ideas to fix it, but it's not making major headway, so he's hoping it's cloudy for the rest of the season. But high temperatures weren't the only explanation for Mercedes' lack of pace. The rough, abrasive tarmac at the Red Bull ring didn't help either, but team boss Toto Wolff revealed the most likely cause. He says Mercedes repeated an extreme setup choice that worked well in Montreal and seemed successful in cooler conditions earlier in the Austria weekend. But it turned into what Wolff called a complete shot in the knee when things got hotter, meaning Mercedes lost a potential podium and, thanks also to Antonelli's error, a place in the Constructors' Championship. It's tempting to take Ferrari's joint best qualifying result of the year, plus its second biggest points haul finish, as evidence that its new floor has elevated it to being best of the rest behind McLaren. After all, Charles Leclerc finished over 40 seconds clear of the next non-Ferrari. But Mercedes' setup woes, plus Verstappen's miserable qualifying, then the Antonelli wipeout makes that hard to judge. In fairness, Ferrari executed things very well all weekend, extracting the potential in the way team boss Fred Vasseur has been calling for his squad to do all season. That full potential was just still nowhere near good enough to give McLaren anything to worry about, even if the new floor seemed to work as expected. Leclerc was once again compromised by having to lift and coast throughout the race for car management reasons, just as he did in Barcelona and Montreal. There will be hope when the next part of its upgrade arrives, at some point before the summer break, that Ferrari can take a meaningful step. For now, it seems to have just made minor progress combined with some much needed solid execution. Considering the moody comments Alpine F1 boss Flavio Briatore made in its official press releases through the Austria weekend, you'd hate to know what he was actually saying behind closed doors. Briatore's not mincing his words over Alpine's poor performance in 2025, which he says is increasingly concerning. Pierre Gasly overachieved getting into Q3 but went backwards on Sunday, which was partly exaggerated by some floor damage that made the car undrivable. Meanwhile, teammate Colapinto had another race to forget, this time getting spun by Tsunoda, suffering from some front wing damage, and picking up a penalty for carelessly running championship leader Oscar Piastri off the road while being lapped. Neither driver would have scored points even with a straightforward race. Briatore said Sundays are proving a very different story for a team that looks like it can have a car in Q3 most weekends, and he warns this must be understood if we want to turn this season around. With Gasly saying there are no updates on the horizon, that's going to be a massive struggle. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri have raced each other before, but never for a race win for as long or as hard as they did in Austria, and in doing so, they set a clear limit for what McLaren will tolerate. All the talk of a good culture or a clear understanding of what's allowed is quite nebulous without a flashpoint to bring that out into the open and test it. Norris tripping over Piastri in Canada didn't do that, because it was so obviously his fault, but the line has been clearly drawn following Piastri's Austrian near miss, when he narrowly avoided hitting Norris while attempting a very optimistic pass at turn 4. Team boss Andrea Stella said that was considered too marginal, and that Piastri was warned about a repeat, because he locked up and was therefore not in control. This gives a clear indication of what to expect from the two, because while this was the first time they've gone wheel to wheel for a win, it surely won't be the last. In his own words, 2025 has been an incredibly tough year for Liam Lawson. Sacked just 2 races into his dream promotion at Red Bull and then blown away by Isaac Hadjar once he returned to Racing Bulls, it was very easy to write Lawson's F1 future off as doomed. He did score 4 points and play the team game well in Monaco, but that was on a weekend where Hadjar was an even more impressive 6th. In Austria, Lawson fired in what's arguably the most convincing weekend of his F1 career so far, starting and finishing in 6th place on a one-stop strategy while Hadjar went pointless. Even though Hadjar reported floor damage in the race, Lawson never looked like anything other than the faster Racing Bulls driver this weekend. This 6th place meant a great deal to Lawson, who knew he'd been lacking a headline result. He's often cut a baffled, frustrated figure on race weekends, but he was almost ecstatic on Sunday, having finally delivered the result he feels he's been capable of for some time. One weekend alone won't secure his future, but it can be the foundation to prove his F1 prospects aren't dead yet. Gabriel Bortoleto broke his F1 points duck in Austria and finally gave a quietly good rookie season a strong headline result. The reigning Formula 2 champion has been impressive in qualifying in particular for Sauber, where he has a formidable benchmark in Nico Hülkenberg, but for different reasons it hadn't quite come together on Sundays. Now it has. Bortoleto drove a mature, assured race to finish 8th. And while it could have been even better if he had judged a late fight with his mentor Fernando Alonso a little more sharply, this was still a very good result. Alonso said Bortoleto has been outstanding this year, and missing out on points had been maybe not fair in Gabriel's head sometimes, but that perceived wrong has now been righted. Plus, Bortoleto was backed up by Hülkenberg in 9th in what was Sauber's first double points finish since late 2023. The Audi-owned team is building real momentum that makes it a serious candidate in the fight for 6th place in the championship, or maybe even 5th. Esteban Ocon described another solitary point for Haas after a very well executed drive from 17th on the grid as being not well paid for the effort. His hope is it will make the difference at the end of the year, but it's making a difference right now as it keeps Haas just ahead of Aston Martin in 7th in the championship, with Sauber close behind. The problem is that those teams look clearly faster than Haas, and Racing Bulls pulled 7 points clear of it in Austria too. Both Ocon and Ollie Behrman have stressed the need for improvements to do much more than fight for scraps. The car has not been upgraded while several others have, and it is weaker in qualifying than in race trim, which Ocon says seems to be the result of a straight-line speed disadvantage when others activate the DRS. This has its biggest penalty of the season at the Red Bull Ring, with 3 DRS zones around a short circuit. Behrman said an upgrade package is coming very soon, and it's much needed, because Haas is just about keeping its head above water in the midfield. Williams has gone from fighting for big points with Ferrari to being in the middle of a reliability crisis that threatens to squander its great leap forward. Floor damage and braking woes doomed Carlos Sainz to 19th on the grid, but he didn't even leave that grid spot before a lengthy delay. And when he got ready to start from the pit lane instead, the car dramatically caught fire. Teammate Alex Albon, who swerved his way into 7th place amid the first lap chaos, soon joined him on the sidelines, suffering his 3rd consecutive retirement. Albon suspected it was similar to the engine cooling issue behind his Montreal DNF. The team's going to investigate, but it doesn't yet have a proper fix. That's worrying when there's only a few days until the British Grand Prix, where Williams expects to have strong pace. Right now, it risks squandering further point-scoring finishes, just as its midfield rivals are starting to take chunks out of its once healthy advantage in the Constructors' Championship.